Hello, everybody. How you doing? Hey. So welcome. Appreciate you coming. So is this the first time for anybody here at Savoy? Well, all right, great. Well, welcome. Hopefully you enjoy our program. Hopefully you've been able to go out and look at the cars and the exhibits that we have. So what I'll do is just a couple of housekeeping things here, then I'm going to turn it over so you have plenty of time to hear from them, because I know you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from them. That's why you came. But one of the things I wanted to mention was that Savoy has been nominated for USA Today's 10 Best Reader's Choice Awards for Automobile Museums. Yeah, thanks. So if you could go on and vote, it goes until April 10th. So if you want to nominate us as number one, we'd appreciate that. So please go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead, and one of the things I wanted to mention was the exhibits that we have. We have one that's getting ready to end, and that's the fabulous fins. And so you'll notice that we opened up the hoods. So please go out and check those out, because they go out at the this weekend. And so this will be the last time that you'll be able to see those. And then we have Porsches. So 75 years of Porsche will be coming in. So that'll start April 4th. So that'll be a great exhibit. I've gotten 12 out of the 14 cars in. I got the last 2 coming in on Monday just in time. So that'll be great. So again, and then enjoy the other exhibits. I mean, the locally owned, they're just fabulous cars from people that are here in the Bartow County and surrounding county. You'll see those in the Great Hall. And then our British invasion, which is why we have our guests here to talk a little bit about that. And then we'll move on to the next. And I want to mention the Connection, which is our very first car show, and that's May 6th. And so that's a benefit, for the car museum, and it'll be located actually on the showgrounds on the lawn. So please come. It's an open registration, and we'll take the first 250 cars that register. And so now I'd like to go ahead and get it ready for from across the pond. Let me do a quick introduction. I think you guys probably know most of these people. But Wayne Carini, I think everybody knows Wayne, master historian, automotive restorer, and host of Chasing Classic Cars for many years. 16, 17, how many years?
16 years.
16 years. So Ken Gross, those may know Ken from around here, but also he's an author, historian, curator. He's typically helping us curate a lot of our exhibits here. So thanks, Ken. And then we have Michael Arnolt. So Michael here on the end. Pretty famous last name if you know any of the British cars with the Arnolt Bristols. So Michael's dad was S.H. Wacky, as he was nicknamed Arnolt, and also was the owner of a couple different companies, if I remember right, through the years. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken to get started, and we'll do questions and answers at the end of the program, and we'll have a couple microphones, and we will be recording this, so please wait for us to give you the microphone to ask your question. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bruce, very much, and good evening, everyone. Special thanks to Wayne and Michael for traveling down here tonight for our little show. And there we go. So we're going to talk about the British invasion, and I want to talk a little bit about that first before we talk to Michael about his background, his family, his father, and the Arnolt cars. So the British invasion, what was it? Wayne, how would you describe?
Well, I mean, so after the war, a lot of servicemen came home, and they saw these great, lightweight, fun cars to drive, and saw a lot of races and rallies and hill climbs over in Europe. And so they figured they had to have one themselves, and so MGs became the car of choice. MGTCs were brought in, and then it became very popular into these small, lightweight cars, because in the United States, when they got home, were these big, boxy heavy cars like Fords and Chevys and Chryslers and things like that. And so these were cars that were a little bit more fun to drive, and they were pretty reasonably priced at the time to bring over. And it was easy to get one over from Europe. And so that really started the invasion, and then it took off on its own because these cars were becoming more and more popular because there was so many sports car clubs being formed, and they found out that they were easily raced and hill climbed and rallied, and it became a lot of fun.
So one of the other factors after the war, remember Britain was bombed just as badly as Germany and other countries, and they needed hard currency. And one of the ways to do it was to build cars and sell cars if they could get an allocation of steel and rubber and so forth. But Michael, I guess I'd like to ask you how your dad got interested in the car business and how that segued into building cars with the Arnolt name on it.
Well, I would say in the early 50s, actually, probably about 1950, he got interested in distributing cars, and he was a distributor for BMC, British Motor Corporation, at the time in Chicago, and they distributed BMC cars to about 6 or 7 states in the Midwest. And then, although I have to tell you that I can't go back and read his mind, he probably, instead of just distributing, wanted to drive cars. In fact, he started racing. I'm trying to think the first car, well, I don't think it might have been a Simca, and had it in his mind that he wanted to import a car that was not just a family car, but that was a race car. In fact, a number of people that I'm familiar with would drive their car, their Arnolt Bristol, to work every day, and then on the weekend drive it to the racetrack. So he was able to fulfill that void, that need, and he was a race car driver himself, and actually very successful in it.
So when you think about it, if you're a car guy or gal, what cooler thing would it be for your father to be an importer, a constructor, a builder, and all that stuff? But I think some of you might know a little bit about Stanley Arnolt, but maybe don't know where his nickname came from. And I'm going to see if I can get this to work for you. And maybe Michael can tell us. His nickname was Wacky, which is a little unusual. So how did that come about?
Fair question. 1939, he started got the rights to this inboard engine. It was used as an auxiliary engine in sailboats and other small craft. And he was going to pilot this boat across Lake Michigan. Well, Lake Michigan, from St. Joe, Michigan to Chicago, I mean, you could understand that you could get in a 12 or 14 foot boat, that it could be quite unruly because of the waves. In any case, he came across through the fog, and I want to tell you, I think he might have set this up himself. But anyway, so the reporter from Chicago sometimes says, "There he is, there's Wacky," and that's how the name grew.
So some people might have thought that wasn't the most flattering nickname in the world. But he obviously enjoyed it.
He embraced it. Yeah,
right.
He clearly embraced it. He wasn't. He did not find it unflattering at all.
Well, along the way, as part of embracing it, he built one of the most interesting sports cars in the post-war period. And since we've got one right here, we're going to stand up and kind of give you a guided tour of this terrific car. How many of you know what an Arnolt Bristol is? Show of hands, familiar with them? Oh, good. Okay, well, we're going to tell you stuff you don't know. Maybe Wayne would start with a little bit of the engineering, and Michael can talk about how they were built, where they were built, and how they were sold.
So I'm very fortunate that I have 2 of these. I have a Roadster and one of the 4 coupes that are still existing. They built 6 coupes, and only 4 are left. Mine was the Paris Auto Show car, and it was on the Paris Auto Show stand, and it had a split windshield. And so I think what we'll do, let me see if I can turn this turntable and not get killed.
See you, Wayne.
We're in Wayne's world.
We don't have combat pay to get on that thing.
So if you look at this car and you see these beautiful sharp lines that go up, and this one especially, especially in the coupe. And then you see a side scoop in here, and you see that scoop on the hood. It sort of reminds you of what kind of car that was built later on. So this is built in 1954, I believe, right, Michael? Mine is built in 54. It sort of brings in the Stingray coupe, right, with the sharp lines that go down here, especially this line that's sharp and it goes down into the door. So, and my car, my coupe has a split windshield. So 2 pieces of glass and a chrome strip that goes down in the front to join them together. So if you look at the coupe version, and I think we've got a picture of that we'll show later, it sort of has a boat tail in the back. So what I think happened is that the General Motors designers saw this beautiful design and they wanted to copy it, and they copied it and made the Stingray, but instead of splitting the windshield, they put the split in the back window. And it really looks like it. It's got pop-up headlights, the coupe does. These are really unusual lights that are in the grille. You'll see that in the front. Usually the headlights are over here, but in this one, they're in the front. And the most unusual part of this car is how high it is, how tall it is. And so the hood has to be tall because the engine is sitting there, and then it's got 3 carburetors sitting on top, and it really needs all of that room up on top with that scooped so the carburetors fit under the hood. They were taller than most cars, and it made it look very unusual because everybody's into these low-slung, fast little MGs and things like that. But I think it gives it great presence, and of course with the cutout in the back fender. These were built by Bertone. And the story goes, and you may be able to clarify it, Michael, that your dad went to Bertone, and Bertone was about ready to fold their tent and go out of business.
Right.
And your dad went and said...
It was at a car show.
Right.
And he said to him, and it was a car that resembled the Arnolt MG, and he said something to the effect is, I want a couple hundred of these. Well, he thought he said he wanted 2. He said, no, a couple hundred. So that kind of gave Bertone a lease on life. And it was a famous bodybuilding family going back, I don't know how many years.
It was, but they were ready to fold at that point in time.
So it gave them a lease on life to be able to build these cars and have them imported to the States.
So they built it on the MG chassis first.
And they used the MG chassis, and they actually used the MG engine.
Right. And that was a TD chassis.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you get to Bristol, many of you probably know that Bristol was an aircraft manufacturer, and they also built automobiles, certainly after the war, because it was a great opportunity for them. They used an interesting engine, that BMW inline 6 with almost hemispherical heads. I mean, really an engine that had powered the BMW 328 before the war, a really popular sports car, but it was tall, as Wayne said, and that's the reason. The designer was Franco Scaglione. Did you ever meet him?
No, I did not.
Yeah, well, many of you probably know he designed the first Lamborghini, the GTV, which was the 350, and a very talented man. And you can, to me, this car says Italian all over it, which makes it extremely exciting.
And I think he also designed the Bat, and there were 5 different...
He did the 3 Alfa Romeo Bats.
Anybody seen the Alfa Romeo Bats? I mean, they're really unbelievable, beautiful shapes. And this car has all of those attributes, except for it doesn't have that bat back end on the car, but still looks very much like it.
So
it's 1954. How do I buy an Arnolt Bristol? How did it work?
There were distributors. They distributed them throughout the U.S. When the Arnolt Bristol came over, they did not have to go just to the Midwest states. They went anywhere all over the U.S. Shell Cavalli out in California. I'm trying to think of the other entities out east. What were some of the importers?
There's a New York distributor.
Continental,
and then there was one in San Francisco, Los Angeles.
Right.
But what was interesting is that these cars were actually assembled in Chicago.
Well, the engine and chassis came from Filton, England, as you said, Bristol, and then the body was, then the chassis were sent to Italy, and if I'm not mistaken, the bodies were then placed on those cars and then finished in the U.S.
In the U.S., right, at your father's plant. And so it was 140 of these cars
142.
built? 142, including the 6 coupes. And then there was a terrible fire at the factory.
1956, there was a fire that destroyed, I can't remember how many cars, but there were 12 Arnolt Bristols in that fire.
Yeah, so you got 12 cars that were destroyed.
Right.
And smoke damage to a lot of them. The one I have was actually in the factory and had smoke damage to it. And they repainted it at the factory, but still had smoke damage.
Right.
Yep.
And so out of those 100 and let's say 30 or so, or 28,
Until we
there's
rehearsed
about
this.
100 left. Is that
Right.
correct?
No, yes.
Right.
So Wayne has 2. I only have 1. But
Yeah. Now there's
He
something
had
the matter
many.
with
anyway, I can't help it. He outcars me. But let me just tell you kind of a brief story about the car that I have. There was a car that was in storage over in Switzerland. It had been used as a show car from about 1954. And I don't know whether or not, my father had died in 1963, but for some reason or other, my mother recalled or somebody mentioned to her that where it was stored over in Switzerland. So when it was shipped back, I kind of raised my hand and said, Mom, I want to buy this car. And I did have to buy it. I paid the storage fees and the shipping fees. So anyway, it was never titled until I had it.
So there was 2 different models, or 3. There was the coupe, there was the roadster. This is a bolide, which was the bare bones car. Didn't have bumpers on it, had a very different windshield. And then there was the deluxe, which had the bumpers on it. It had a soft top that came with it, very little extras on it, but yet it was a great looking and fantastic driving car. But you got to sell them. How do you sell them though? You go racing.
Yeah, that's a good point. The success that the Arnolt Bristol had on the racetracks had a lot to do with the desirability of from owners who wanted to race them as well. And as I said, some folks drove them through the week and raced them on the weekend. So it was that kind of a dependable car.
Well, and the photo up there shows a lineup of 3 of them. Do you know where that picture might have been taken?
That was in Sebring.
At Sebring.
That was 1955.
Right.
So, and your dad was really into it. I mean, he was into racing. He developed a team. I mean, very few companies had 3 cars in a race. Right. I mean, so he was really into the racing aspect of it, and he felt that selling the cars was very important to race them and be successful at racing. And they were very successful.
When they raced around the Midwest and all around the states in Florida, but Sebring was all around the states in Florida, California. But Sebring was kind of the key victory that 12-hour endurance race, and just kind of as a show and tell, this is the first place prize for that class from 1955. And that is the team trophy. So they finished 1st, 2nd, and 4th in class, and therefore had the team trophy. And this pith helmet was worn by all the crew. So, here, Wayne, you try it.
That's okay.
So Rene Dreyfuss signed that photo. What was Rene's involvement with?
Rene Dreyfuss, an interesting story about Rene Dreyfuss, and I actually didn't learn all of the story about him until much later, but I'll try to do the short version. Rene Dreyfuss was a French driver who had driven Mercedes and what else?
Bugatti.
And a very successful
Bugatti and
racer.
Delahaye.
Grand Prix driver.
Yep.
Very successful in racing in Europe. I'll see if I can do the short version of this, but the history of Rene Dreyfuss is one of the an American wanted Rene to race in the 500. Well, it was just before it was during the war, and there was, what's the great race called that in Germany?
Nürburgring?
I can't remember. It's called a great race, and Hitler and the German cars always expected to win. Well, he got connected to, trying to think of the...
Sounds like?
Sounds like. Oh,
We'll make it a real short story.
Okay, anyway, so he wound up going to New York. He and his brother went to New York.
It was Luigi Canetti.
Yes.
He came to with Luigi, I believe, right? And
And they started a restaurant in New York called Le Chantecler.
Yeah, I started a restaurant, and,
Right.
and so is that where your dad met him and tried to talk him into
And-
racing for him?
The answer is, you can see he did talk him into it.
Right.
Otherwise, he wouldn't have signed. Yes. Anyway,
Touche.
so that was 1955. In fact, I know the mechanic in the back there, and that's Juan Lopez. So that's 1955, where they won the team trophy, and they also won the team trophy in 1956. This is 1957.
I hope Rene wasn't driving there.
No, he wasn't. But that was the car my father was driving, and he just turned it over to his partner, a fellow by the name of co-driver by the name of Bob Goldich, warned him about this S-curve, that there was some oil or something like that. Lost control, and he was killed. Now you can see none of them had roll bars, and roll bars probably wouldn't have helped him. But the sad thing about it is that's the very first fatality that they have experienced at Sebring.
Okay, that was Sebring. Yeah. Yeah, but they were racing cars.
Mm-hmm.
Buy it on Monday after racing on Sunday.
That's right.
And
So
the
this is one of the
Yeah.
6 coupes that they built. And mine is just like this. Unfortunately, it's not completed, but you'll see the pop-up headlights in the front, sort of depicting the Corvette, and of course the scoop in the side. Just a great-looking car. This had knockoffs on it too, which were really for racing. Your dad had what, 10 sets of these made?
Yes.
10 sets of these wheels. I'm fortunate that my car's got all 5 wheels that go with it. And they're Baranis. They're made by the Barani factory.
Yep.
Yeah. So really a racy looking car. I can't wait to get mine done. I bought mine 18 years ago and swore in 8 months it would be done. 18 years ago. That's what happens when you own a shop. Your car goes to the back of the line, and then somebody else's car comes in and you fix somebody else's car. But
So Michael, the success, the brief success of the Arnolt Bristol, was it the racing accident that kind of brought things to a close, or what? What happened?
My father did retire from racing after that. In fact, they pulled the team cars out of the race in '57, and he no longer raced. But the other part about it is the car distributorship that he had, the BMC car distributorship. He had a stroke and ultimately died. Had a massive myocardial infarction. And so essentially my mother was forced to sell the dealership. But the racing dwindled down after about 1961. There were still some independent entries, but no factory entries.
And it's funny, people think the way cars are sold today that these things would fly off the shelf. Well, they didn't. Matter of fact, cars that were built in '54 sometimes didn't get sold until '59 or '60. Right. So they were left over and moving around, but that didn't deter him because he started building other cars.
Well, this was the Arnold MG was the first car that he built, and that was the one that he helped Bertone get back on his feet. And then the next car, if I'm not mistaken, was the Arnold Aston, and I believe there were 5 of those.
Mm-hmm.
I think we showed a picture of the Aston. Let me go back here. There it is.
Yeah.
This is and
So instead of the Bristol chassis, this has an Aston Martin chassis, and you can see the Aston Martin grille in the front. That's very standard on a lot of Aston Martins. And you'll see also that the front end of this car is a lot lower than this one because they're using a different engine in the car, so they shaped it quite differently.
But Aston Martin, I think he built 3 cars, and then that came to an end. They didn't want this beautiful car?
I don't know. You know what? I do know the answer to it. Aston Martin, it appeared to be so successful, Aston Martin did not want to sell them any more engines or chassis.
Oh.
Yeah.
So they went back
and
to
all
doing-
of those cars still exist.
Oops.
All of the Aston
Sorry, everyone.
Arnolds. Yeah. And then they built a Bentley. And so was this for your mom?
No, I never saw that car. Although someone at one time wanted to sell it to me, but I had never seen it prior to.
But that was just something that he decided to build a luxury car.
One off. I don't know. Yeah.
And that car's still in the United States, correct, Ken?
Yep. It's in Arizona.
Yeah.
In Bill Pope's collection in Scottsdale, right? Yeah. Well, we think of hybrids today as an electric car that that also has a gasoline engine and is dual purpose and so forth. But in this era, a hybrid was something totally different, right?
Yeah, well, a hybrid was something sort of like if you see my Allard that's out there, the blue Allard J2, that is a American engine in a foreign car chassis. So the Allard was a chassis that was built over in England, and they were built for Ford engines, they were built for Chrysler engines and Cadillac engines. And so a flathead, a Hemi, or a Caddy 331. The car out there has a 331 Caddy. So that was a hybrid. That's where that came from. Hybrids today are a mix of gasoline and electric. So it's a mix of one to the other.
So before we leave the sort of Arnolt saga, you can see the MGTD here, and under that little red coupe, of course, is this square-rigged classic British sports car. We think it looks a lot better with an Arnolt Bertone Scaglione bodied car on it, and you can see these, of course, in the museum. MG finally began to build a more streamlined car with the MGA here. And talking about the cars from Britain and our exhibit, which has a really a nice group of examples, the Jaguar that you see here is an alloy car, because when Jaguar first tooled out for these XK120s after the war, they weren't sure they could sell more than 200 of them. So they only built 200, all aluminum-bodied cars. This is one of the one we have is one of the rare aluminum-bodied cars. I think the owner is here tonight. Show of hands up here somewhere.
Very nice car.
Thank you so much.
Very nice.
It's really fabulous. Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, how you can tell an alloy body car is that in the front you'll see the signal lights in the tops of the fenders. On the steel cars they're molded in, on the alloy body cars they're just added on. And that's one way of telling an alloy body car from a steel. But what a beautiful shape.
One unique thing about the Arnolt Bristol is it's all steel, with the exception of the hood and trunk, or as the Brits call it, the lid and the bonnet, are skinned in aluminum.
And they wanted to build, and I think they built one in aluminum?
Two aluminum.
Okay, two aluminums. But their fear is this peak, that it would split, that there would be an issue with that peak with a thin aluminum, so they built them in the steel. But still, I mean, I think one of the most beautiful cars. I'll tell you a story about how I got my first Arnolt Bristol. There was a shop in Connecticut called Candy Pool Sports Car Shop. It was a little tiny repair shop for Alfa Romeos and everything British. And my Arnolt Bristol was inside the shop because it had a broken crankshaft. It wasn't mine at the time, and every time I had to walk in the front door of the place, I'd have to rub my butt on that car because the door and the bench over here, so to squeeze in the front, and I must have rubbed against that car probably 2,000 times in my lifetime. I was in Savannah giving an estimate to a friend, Andy Green, to restore a 275 Ferrari, and I looked in the corner and I saw this car covered up. And you can imagine with a car cover on it, it's very distinctive shape. I said, yeah, that's an Arnolt Bristol. He says, yeah, that actually is a guy that just moved here from Connecticut. And I said, J.D. Eigelhart? And he goes, yeah, that's it. Matter of fact, he called me yesterday, he wants to sell it. 10 minutes later, I owned it. So that was my first foray. And then the coupe was brought to me by Mr. Fitzpatrick, or Fitzgerald, I think it is. Anyways, out of Boston. He had several Arnolt Bristols. You know him.
Yep.
And he brought me the car to restore. And I looked at it and I said, I'm very interested in restoring the car. How long is it going to take, he said. And I said, well, it's taking a year, maybe 14 months. And we got a couple of friends over here in the audience that were restoring a car for us, so they know that. And he said, you're crazy. I can have that done in 4 months. I said, good, take it away. 4 years later, he called me. He says, it's been in 3 shops, and it's still not, it's just stripped, and it's all in pieces. Would you please finish the car? Well, he came down to talk about finishing the car, and he says, I'm so disgusted with the project. Why don't you just buy it from me? And I was so thrilled to be able to own that car, especially with only 4 in existence.
When did you get the Roadster?
The Roadster I got probably about 21 or 22 years ago.
Okay. I should have known that Wayne was going to have problems with the Arnolt Bristol, because we ran into each other at Lime Rock, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I can't remember. There was a reunion of Arnolt cars. And Wayne said, you know, I'd like to take this for a spin around the track. I said, you go right ahead. Well, he came back. When he got in, he handed me the steering wheel. You know, it wasn't a good sign, but anyway.
It's not my fault. It's not my fault he didn't bolt the steering wheel on. He's trying to kill me.
So we're looking here at the yin and yang, if you will, of the British invasion, because by the time the Mini came out, it was really a sure thing. You had the Beatles, and you had Twiggy, and you had British fashion. But we're going to show you a couple more of the British cars that made this excitement along the way, and several of them are here in our exhibit tonight. The Austin-Healey might have the sexiest windshield anybody ever put on a street car.
Yeah. That's the 104. And they made two versions of that. This is a 104M, and that windshield lays down. And these cars were very successfully raced. The M kit was put on at the factory on a few cars, but then they sold it as an accessory and was put on at the dealerships afterwards. So in order to really have the real true factory M's, you really got to do some homework and write British Leyland, and they'll give you that information, whether it was a real factory conversion or converted after at the dealer. But one of the greatest cars, I'm a big fan of those cars. They drive so well, they look so good, they sound good, they do everything right.
So one of the ways you can win a bar bet in Britain about Healey 100Ms is the way that you tell if it's a real car. A number of years ago, Mike Dale, who was the president of Jaguar, was visiting the Peterson Museum where I was the director, and we had a 100M on display. And as Wayne said, some were done at the factory and some were done by dealers. Well, they have a hot camshaft, and Mike lifted the hood and he showed us a little brace near the radiator, and he said, yeah, this is a real one. He ran his finger down it, and I said, okay, what's the magic here? And he said, there's a little dent. Donald Healey was such a cheapskate, he didn't want us to pull the engines to put the camshaft in, but we realized if we dented that bracket, we could stick a cam in the motor and never take it out. So that's how you tell. Yeah. My other Austin-Healey story is one of my college roommates. His name was Red Sackett, and he and his girlfriend Betty were quite the couple. And Red had an Austin-Healey, which most of us were really envious of, and some of us were envious of Betty, who was kind of a fox in that era. And when we were seniors, Red came in one day and he said, I'm selling the Healey. I said, really? Why? He said, well, you know, Betty and I are going to get married, and I need a much more sensible car. And I said, what are you getting? He says, oh, I'm going to get a Chevy. And I thought, oh, dear. And a couple of weeks later, and that ended the conversation. A couple of weeks later, he said, my new Chevy's here. And I said, yeah, great. And he said, you want to come out and see it? I said, well, it looks like every other Chevy. He said, come out and see it. I walked out, and of course, this is 1963, and it's a bubble top 409 with three on the tree. He didn't want to wait for a 4-speed, and the next thing I knew, I was driving down the Potsdam-Canton Road in the fastest car I'd ever ridden in, a Chevy 409. But I lamented that he'd sold the Healey still. My heart was with the Healey. So over here, we've got an MG TC, perhaps the car that started it all, and the car that was the basis, the TD was the basis for the Arnolt. So your experience, both of you, with TCs.
TCs are great cars, especially if you put the correct wheels on them. So they have very tall wheels, and when you're racing it, it's not the most important thing is getting grip, and so the tires are about 3 inches across. So you put a smaller diameter wheel and a wider tire and a taller tire, and they really go good, and especially with a supercharger. And so superchargers is what we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. And you don't know this. I haven't talked to you about this yet, but we have another story of your father involved with a supercharger.
Okay.
So if you buy an old MG and it's got an Arnolt supercharger on it, suddenly 54 horsepower becomes maybe 75 or 80.
Yeah.
And how did the supercharger business come about?
I'd have to ask Wayne.
Well,
the need for speed, perhaps.
Oh.
Yeah, superchargers, of course, were the optimum thing to have. You know, you could bolt them on yourself, but I own a Jaguar right now, and we've got a picture of that coming up that actually your dad helped build that car too.
Well, the import dealership he had was BMC, but which is Morris Minor, MG, Austin-Healey. But he also retailed some other cars, including the Jaguar and what else? Bentley, Rolls. So he had a retail shop as well as.
I was at a automobile auction yesterday in Connecticut, and I was going through some magazines, and I found in a Sports Car Club of America magazine that your dad sold accessories, and there was a heater in there that he sold for MGs, and it says, you know, don't be chilly, and it chilly's like the, you know, the word shaking because it's so cold, and buy this heater for $29, you know, and it fit in an MG to keep you warm. Of course, you didn't have a top or side curtains, but it would keep your feet warm, maybe.
So taking the hybrid analogy a little bit further, we have one of the new acquisitions here at the museum is this Nash Healey, and it was a marriage between Donald Healey and the Nash company. It has a Nash engine in a Healey chassis. I think maybe Pininfarina was involved with the body, but at the time, the competition, if you will, would be something like this Chevrolet Corvette, which is a stunning car, but with an anemic little 6-cylinder, 235 cubic inch motor and a 2-speed power glide. So people raced Nash Healeys successfully, not so much the 6-cylinder Corvette.
No.
Now, we're talking about British cars as though they're really something wonderful. So here's the dirty, dark secret. Some of you know, Wayne has restored some. Michael has owned them. I've owned a couple.
This is what happens if you leave your Jaguar outside and you forget about it because it stopped running because the Lucas Electrics failed, and you sort of walk away from it. You put a tarp on it, and you lift the tarp up 20 years later, and this is what you find. You know, Lucas Electrics get a bad plug, and they should, because it was really terrible. You know, the lights would go out, it wouldn't start. The fuel pump, you always carried a rock or a hammer in the trunk of your British car, and you reached underneath, and you'd have to hit the fuel pump every once in a while to have the points start shaking again. You know, well, many times we did that.
The interesting thing about Lucas, too, is that a few years ago, Lucas teamed up with Morelli. And Morelli was kind of the Italian version of Lucas.
Right.
And as an enthusiast, we looked at the union of these two companies and thought,
where's this going?
And rust, of course, the tin worm, as we like to say, is the enemy of a lot of cars, but particularly the enemy of British cars. They didn't come over with undercoating or rust proofing or any such stuff. And this is the story on this car is it was left out 2 nights. No. Michael, any thoughts about the reliability of British cars?
Well, let me tell you a story that has to do with undercoating. So when I got this car, and I live in Indiana, we have lots of snow. So I thought what I would do, the first thing I did is I did a 9995. Who was the undercoat company? The real...
Z-Bart?
Huh?
Z-Bart?
Z-Bart. Well, I realized I'm not driving this car in the winter. I took the top off 6 months after I got it. I'm not driving it in the winter. So when I decided to take it off, it cost me $2,000 to take the Z-Bart off. It cost me $100 to put on and $2,000 to take off. That's my tin story.
Well, they always said, Eric Zausner said once, a dear friend we were talking about today, that you could drive the Jaguar in the garage and just go in the house and you could hear it falling apart in the garage, and the rust falling off of it and stuff. And we're not here to knock Jaguars. A lot of British cars were this way. They were just prone for rust. It's planned obsolescence. But then you have a great car like this Arnolt, I mean, it's AC, and it was 2-engine in it. You could have an AC Ace engine, or you could have the Bristol engine, the same engine that's in this car. And so I've had a couple of those, and with the Bristol engine, it is really a great car. The Ace is okay too, and so this, though, is how we got to this. So that's the car that Carroll Shelby saw. He decided, boy, that would be kind of cool to put a big V8 engine in that car. So he brought a couple of those over, took that Bristol or AC Ace engine out, and they put the 260 V8, that's the engine they first started with, and they created the Cobra. Now you can see the similarity. The grille changed a little bit. This would be known as a slab side car, where this car over here is more of a flared fender car, but yet pretty much the same everything else. You can see the windshield, you can see the shape, and then again, that was a hybrid. This is a hybrid because we've got a British chassis, a German engine, which started off as BMW, and an Italian body. It was made in the United States.
You have one other thing. This car has 3 different size wrenches. Yeah, believe it or not, it's got millimeter, standard American, and Wentworth.
Yeah.
So you go to work on you go to work on your engine, you need Wentworth, not millimeter.
Yeah. So.
And you go to work on larger parts of the body, you need standard American. So yeah,
you got to have a complete toolbox.
Yep.
That's for sure.
I guess it's Wentworth.
So in the era when the Arnolt Bristol was a new car, we had a lot of excitement on the newsstands, which helped spread the word nationally that these cars were going on. That issue of Road and Track happens to be the first issue of Road and Track I bought as a 13-year-old. You can do the math. And excitedly brought it home because the MG Octagon there was on the cover, and one of my neighbors had a TC and let me help him clean it and polish it. And I couldn't wait to tell my father that I'd found a magazine on the newsstand, and here was Mr. Durkee's badge on the front. My father didn't look at the badge. He looked at the 35 cents up there, and he said, "You've spent nearly your whole week's allowance on a magazine. You're going to have to learn to manage your money." So one of the fads that was going on in this era was you can't buy an MG or a Jaguar or some sporty car. You could build one with a Ford chassis and a fiberglass body. This Debonair is a good example in the center. And then over here we have Dave Garroway, one of the first hosts of the Today Show, with his SS100, which Wayne owns today.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. That was, of course, Dave Garroway was the most famous person in the world because he was the first live television host of anybody, and it went worldwide. And he was a car fanatic, and he raced this car quite often. So this car raced at Watkins Glen. He was on the pole at Watkins Glen for a support race, and back then they had Le Mans starts. So they lined the cars up on the street, and they'd be across the street, and they'd wave the flag, and they'd run across the street and jump in. So Garroway jumped in the car, started it up, dumped the clutch, and he left it in reverse. Backed it up, and probably 15 cars had passed him by that time. But the catch I wanted to talk about with this car is that he was a Chicago guy, and he went to your father's shop for all of his work on his car, and it wasn't fast enough for him. So they took that car in and they put a supercharger on it, and I've got pictures of your dad working on that car with Dave Garroway when they were putting the supercharger on it. It still wasn't fast enough because, it just added a few more horsepower. So in 1950, Jaguar came out with the 120 with a 3.8 liter engine, and it was the most powerful thing anybody had ever seen. So Dave Garroway, being the most important television person in the world at that time, he called Jaguar, and Jaguar sold him an engine and transmission. They took that engine out with the supercharger and put the 120 Jag engine in, and he still couldn't win. It was probably his driving ability, but he at least tried. And that engine is still in that car today. I bought it at the Greenwich Concours a few years ago. A good friend of mine, Peter Kumar, bought it and said, "You have to own this car. It's got so much great history. You're into history." And I said, "Nah, I don't want it." And 6-8 months goes by, and we're at the Greenwich Concours, and I walked out on the field at 7 in the morning, and the car's sitting there, and it has alligator interior in it. And I just fell for it. I flipped. So I called Peter up at 7:30 in the morning, and I bought the car over the telephone that morning. And so I own the car now, and we had a little bit of a mishap at a birthday party. Somebody was driving the car without my permission and smashed the side of it. So it turned into, from what you see here in that picture, to...
We will show you in a moment here.
Oh, yeah.
In a minute. Whoop. There it is.
Into that. So it looks a little better in black, I think. It's pretty sexy looking car. That was out at the Detroit Concours, where we had won an award, the car they most wanted to drive home that day. But so switching engines, switching cars, I mean, there's a lot of that went on back then.
Really, and you had interesting personalities.
There's Dave there, too.
We know that there's. We want to keep a little bit of time for questions, but we'll run through these really quickly because I think you'll find it interesting. Garraway was not the only TV personality to be a well-known car person. Walter Cronkite, who was a very respected newscaster, was a successful racer. Although, Michael, if you stand back just a tiny bit, Walter was in a Lotus up here, which is fairly cool. What he was doing in this DAF thing, I don't know, but...
he got talked into it.
I guess.
I guess.
Kind of weird. In the early days of sports car racing, you had multimillionaires who had a bigger checkbook than driving talent. Jim Kimberly was one of those guys. He'd show up with a full rig, a Ferrari, beautiful women, and... the cars finally got too fast for him in this era. Here's Rene, who Michael talked about before, who was in the top picture. He's at Monaco in a Bugatti. He was a fabulous driver, and then he opened the Chanticleer. First, it was called Le Gourmet in New York City, then the Chanticleer, and there he is. The writers who made things popular in those days, David E. Davis, whose connection with British cars was a fire in the MG he turned over. If you're looking at David's right eye, and why it doesn't look like his other eye, and is because of his accident. But he was a fabulous writer, as was John Bond, the founder and first publisher of Road and Track. But the guy who was the writer of that era, who got a lot of people into sports cars, was Tom McHale. And Tom wrote for Mechanics Illustrated. They were one of the first magazines, even before the car books, to do road tests. And Tom had a very colorful way of speaking. One phrase he said, which I've never forgotten, talking about a rather slow car, he said it didn't have enough suds to pull a wet piece of gum out of a baby's mouth. And here he is with his Labrador Joe. Tom's way of showing you how big the trunk size was he always put Joe in the trunk. Joe looked massive in a small trunk and lost in a big trunk, but there they were.
And he was with a Cunningham there.
Yes.
The car was a Cunningham.
Right. So along with Mr. Arnolt, you had Max Hoffman. He's here in a Glockler Porsche. Hoffman had every major franchise, Mercedes, BMW, Jaguar, Volkswagen in the beginning, and was extremely successful. And of course, Sidney Allard, who built the car that Wayne has that's on display. So colorful, interesting personalities, fascinating cars. It's what got us all hooked. Ciao Cavalli, who Michael mentioned on the West Coast, here he is with another hybrid, a British Singer chassis with an engine from overseas. So this was an era we still celebrate, and we hope that you enjoy the cars on display. And we're happy to try to answer some questions or tell some more stories. So fire away. The only request we have is that you wait for a microphone. Those of us at advanced stage have trouble hearing you if you're just speaking.
Okay, we'll start here with the first one.
And you can ask any of us, so just tell us who you want to answer.
It really doesn't matter who answers it. Just curious, the car was a winning car. What made it a winning car? You said horsepower it looks like a high roll center. It's as high as the car sits.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
With the high roll center, the way the car appears,
yeah,
it was successful in racing, but was it a horsepower thing, or did it really handle more than it looked like it would?
It handled really good. I mean, there were a lot of drivers that didn't like how it sat tall and it had a lot of roll in the corners, but yet the handling was still very good. It was a very neutral car, so you didn't get a lot of oversteer or understeer, and I think that was it. As well as it made some good horsepower with that engine with the 3 carburetors.
It was extremely dependable.
So
they finished most races they started, and if you were to look historically, if you look, DNF did not finish. That malady occurred to many a driver and car.
It's like anything; you have to be there at the end to win. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I got a question. So this is one for each of you. German, Italian, and British. You get to pick. Favorite car, make, model, and year. So 1 pick German, 1 pick Italian, 1 pick British.
I can go Italian.
Can I pick Italian?
Go ahead.
Italian.
We all want Italian. Well, let's pick our favorite
tell you what.
Italian car.
Why don't we
1,
all
2,
do
3.
Italian, and then we'll do British, and then we'll do whatever German, I guess, if there is such a thing. So I would quickly say a Ferrari 275 GTB. I was very lucky to own one in 1981. I had to mortgage my house and buy my first and worst wife a fur coat. She got the Lynx coat. I got the Ferrari. The marriage didn't last very long. She still probably has the Lynx coat. I don't have the Ferrari. So, but the fastest, neatest, sexiest car I ever owned.
Well, we're close. Mine's a 1960 250 short wheelbase Ferrari. I think the prettiest and the most compact, and it does everything. Go to the racetrack and wins. Drive it to Starbucks and have a coffee if you'd like. Whatever it does, I mean, it does it well. I've had the pleasure of restoring 8 of them, and I think it's the greatest car they ever made.
This will shock you, but my favorite car is my 1954 Arnolt Bristol.
All right. And really, truly, my favorite car is the next one.
So, another question?
Oh, okay. Down here. One behind you and then you. Okay.
Thank you. I've heard you mention a lot about MGs, of course, and they're very popular and well known, but nobody said the word Triumph. Can you?
Well, Triumph's a great car. I mean, it started off with a TR2, TR3, TR4s. I mean, all of them were really great cars in different ways. I like the TR3 and the TR2 because you could actually, at a stoplight, you could put your hand down and touch the ground. You know, you were so low and that door was so low on it. They had a little bit of handling problems with the TR2s and 3s. They were sort of quick to spin out a little bit, but Triumph was really a great car. There's a lot of great British cars. You know, we didn't talk about Lotus. I mean, Lotus was just a fabulous car. So, I mean, MGs, though, if you looked at the sales ratio, MGs outsold everything. They really did. Manchester Garage, that's what MG stands for.
Thought it was Morris.
Morris Garage,
Morris
I'm
Garage.
sorry, yeah.
My question is sort of related to that. I remember growing up in like the 60s, 70s, that you'd see ads in magazines for MGs, Triumphs, even other British cars, and then it all seemed to go away. It seemed like suddenly they all disappeared.
You saw the slide on the rust, right?
Well, was the reason things like rust? Was it unreliability? I mean, was it emissions controls? What killed the British car industry in America?
It was emissions and safety, bumper heights, a lot of the safety issues. They just couldn't build it into the car for a price point that they could sell it here and make any money at. And so I think that's what really pushed them out. And they became rather ugly, you know, with all the big rubber bumpers on them. A lot of cars did in that era. And then because of the emissions, they were so underpowered.
Masses? Maybe?
But yet,
Not much.
we were just talking about it today, how MGAs and MGBs really don't get that much love, but yet they're damn good cars. You know, I'm actually looking for a really nice MGB GT right now. I think that's a great car. I have an MGA coupe, which I really love. So those cars don't get all the love that they deserve. They're really great cars.
All right, so again, for all 3 of you, other than Ken's first wife, what's the one that got away that you were chasing that you really wish you
Sometimes it's
managed?
good when things get away.
Sometimes it is. What's that car, chasing classic cars, what's that car you were chasing that got away from you that you wish you just managed to?
So who saw the episode with the Lamborghini Miura in the garage with the wheels off of it? And so I went to Chicago and I was told by the mailman about this Miura. And so I went and I met this guy, Jay, and he showed me his car. Remember those doors that folded and they were all rickety? Well, that car was actually bought from Ford Motor Company. Ford had bought the car and dissected it to see what it was like. And then when they were done dissecting it, they sold it and Jay bought it. So I said to Jay, and we had the camera crew, and I said, do you mind if we film with you today? And he says, no, I guess not. What is this? You got some kind of a TV show or documentary? I said, yeah, it's sort of like that. And so anyways, long story short, we went in. He says, how do I watch your TV show? And I said, well, you got to have cable television or something. Well, I don't have something like that. I don't believe in it. Well, how about a DVD player? No, I don't have one of those. So I ended up buying him a DVD player and sending him some DVDs, and he watched it. He said, boy, that's really a great show. How do I get more? I said, well, you got to get it on television. So he says, well, I'm not going to pay those ridiculous prices. So I paid, and I got him cable TV. Honest to God. And every month, my wife would get that cable bill and said, why are we paying for some guy in Chicago's cable? I said, don't worry, it's going to pan out. I'm going to buy this car. When we were there, he says, you know, you can't afford to buy my car. I said, well, just give me a price. Maybe I can. He says, no, there's only one guy, and that's Jay Leno. He can afford to buy my car. I said, well, I know Jay, and he doesn't really want your car. He's got 2 of them. So I don't believe you. So I called Jay. I get Jay on the phone, and I said, Jay, I'm here. I'm looking to buy this Miura. Do you want this car? He says, no, I got 2 of them. I said, would you tell this guy? And his name was Jay. So he gets on the phone. He's talking with Jay, and he hands the phone back to me, and he says, that wasn't Jay Leno. I tried everything. Long story short, the mailman got a backer, and he squirreled the car away from me in the background, and I continued to pay for the cable bill. Until I find out, I go to the Quail Lodge show, and there's the postman with the car. And I said, what happened? He says, oh, I found somebody that loaned me the money, and I bought it. So I went home, I told my wife she could cancel the cable.
Michael, have you got one that got away story?
The one that got away was one I had. It was a 62 Corvette, 327, 340 horse. Isky cam retainers, positive traction. Is a badass car. Anyway, that's the one.
Well, I wanted a Porsche Speedster in the worst way, and one finally came along that looked like the right price. It was owned by Calvin Klein, and it was I'm forgetting the exact name of the Porsche color, but a light tan with red leather upholstery. It was absolutely beautiful, and I thought I knew something about Porsches, so I asked the big question: matching numbers. And Tony Singer, who was selling it, said, yeah, you know, the engine was rebuilt and somehow it doesn't have matching numbers. But it's absolutely perfect, and Calvin Klein has taken great care of it, and it's $52,000. It was a few years ago, but not that long ago. And I said, oh, no matching numbers? Forget it. So that car is now worth $400,000 to $500,000 today. Nobody cares except the absolute diehard Porsche nuts about matching numbers. That one got away.
Yeah.
Wait, I've got one more that got away car. 1957 BMW. My father had purchased it. My mother still had it. And a fella out of Minnesota bought it. And anyway, I forget what the number was. The number was something like $50,000, and today it's about 1.2.
Yeah, more than that.
Even more.
507.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, up here.
Couple more.
Did any of you gentlemen ever have any interesting interactions with Enzo Ferrari?
Nope, not me.
So I went to the F40 preview. I want to say it was 1985 or 86 in Modena. And Ferrari arrived in a Lancia Tema, the V8-powered Lancia. There was a small group of press folk, and we were ushered into a room to meet him. He didn't speak English, although he did understand some, but didn't want to speak with us. And he was ill at the time. He died not long afterward. But even in Italian, and even with the bit of an illness, you could sense the strength of this man and the sort of attitude, strength, I guess is the word. He was formidable. Gunfighter eyes, which we saw only because he lowered his sunglasses for a sec, I think, to look at one of us and then put it back up. I won't forget being driven around Fiorano in an F40 with a factory driver who probably didn't care much about living. But the lasting impression is Enzo Ferrari and his kind of a majesty, which was just really cool. But a story about his son, Piero, I can tell you from firsthand experience, because a number of years later at Pebble Beach, where I've judged for a long time, we had Pegaso and Ferrari at the same time. Many of you probably know Ferrari's symbol is a prancing horse, and Pegaso stands for Pegasus, which is horse, and the Pegaso, of which they only made about 96, has a prancing horse as well. So the first thing you do as a judge at Pebble Beach is you open your magic box at breakfast, and there's the obligatory tie. So you've got 110 people in a room trying to change their tie to have the correct tie. I'm sitting next to Piero Ferrari. He doesn't think I'm watching. He looks at the necktie, the commemorative necktie, which has the Pegaso horse and the Ferrari horse. I can't make this up. Looks at it and shakes his head, puts it back in the box, and when he thinks no one is looking, he slid it under the table. Now, the only bad thing about that is I should have taken the second tie home.
He probably had a Ferrari tie on.
I don't remember what tie he had on, and he was very nice to speak with, but he wanted no part of Pegaso because his father and Wilfredo Ricart, the chief engineer for Pegaso, did not get along, so traditionally.
All right, got a question here.
This question is for Wayne. You had a mechanic that worked for you. I guess he was your chief mechanic for
I
years.
planted that question.
And he was a little older, I think, gentleman. I do not remember his name, but what's his status, or is he passed?
Roger's fine. He couldn't conform with our COVID standards of wearing a mask, and told me that if he's old enough, he'd decide when to die and when to live. Except for he didn't include my employees' thoughts. So I gave him his pink slip, and he went home, and he went and got a job where nobody was wearing masks in the shop, and he's still there today.
Okay, got a question up here.
Whatever possessed Lamborghini to go from tractors to cars?
Well, I think Ken can probably answer that more than me, but old man Ferrari peed him off, basically.
There's a popular, somewhat apocryphal story that Ferruccio Lamborghini was not satisfied with the performance of his car, and he brought it to Ferrari, and they kind of turned him down, and supposedly he said, "I'll build my own car." It's really not true, with all due respect to legend. He was successful in the tractor business. He hired 3 fabulous people: Bob Wallace, a New Zealand engineer, Delara, whose first name I'm forgetting, and Paolo Stanzani. They were all in their early 30s. They were all up-and-coming engineers, and he basically said to them, I want to build a GT car, a really great GT car. At the same time, he had Franco Scaglione doing the designing. So he had an A-team of 30-something guys, and Giotto Bizzarini built the engine, their V12 motor, and that's really what they did. They built the car, and one of the ways he didn't spend crazy money was he never really wanted to go racing. He felt that was a good way to drain bank accounts, but he wanted a terrific GT. So when you had a 350 Lamborghini versus a 330 Ferrari, you had a 5-speed versus a 4. You had fully independent suspension, a 6-carb motor instead of a 3-carb. It outpointed Ferrari in everything, although not everyone liked the styling. I can say that because I owned a 400 GT, and right after my 275, and I thought it was one of the nicest cars I've ever owned.
Yeah, beautiful car, beautiful car. And Bob Wallace ended up living in Arizona.
He did.
And he restored the engine on this Lamborghini Miura that I was doing the body and the paint for. And I always remember he had a Napa, National Auto Parts hose on the engine, and it said Napa on it. So I called Bob and I said, "Geez, Bob, I see a Napa hose on the car. Did you not able to get the original factory hose?" He says, "Is it holding water?" I said, "Yes." Click, and he hung up on it. He could care about being a Napa hose or original hose.
I got to know Bob Wallace, and he was laconic, and as Wayne says, he didn't suffer fools gladly, and he could be short and curt. I couldn't wait to tell him that I had bought this 400 GT Lamborghini and showed him some pictures. We didn't have telephones that did that in those days. He looked at it, and he looked at me, and he said, "We made better cars, mate. We made better cars."
Okay, this last question up there at the top. Yep.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really have been looking forward to this all week. My question is, for the past hour you've been saying you have this car, you have this car. How many cars do you have?
She sounds like my wife.
I asked them.
Well, we have 9, so.
I'll never tell. Now, my answer is I have way too many cars, but never enough. And so that's the answer. But never give a number, because my wife might find out. I'll tell you a quick story. So the Allard that you see outside here, I had 2 Allards. And when I bought this blue one, I had it in the collection. And my grandson, who's a great kid, but boy, he can't keep anything to himself. So we went into the barn one day, and he's sitting in the blue Allard. My wife walks in, and she goes, "Oh, I didn't know you painted your green Allard blue." And he says, No, Grandma, the green one's downstairs. This is new." Really, Connor? You're helping me out here, pal. You can never have enough cars, but it does get a little overwhelming sometimes. But
I want to go back to one story because it occurs to me. A guy from Colorado used to haul my car to different events. And I said to him, "What's the most unusual car you ever hauled?" And he told me it was a Delahaye. And the story goes like this. The Delahaye was the one that was driven that beat Hitler's car in this great race back in, I don't know, it was wartime. And what they did was Hitler had said, "Find that car and destroy it." Well, before Hitler found the car, the people who owned it had completely disassembled it and buried it. Now there are 2 people, one on the West Coast and one on Florida, that said, "That's the car, that's the Delahaye that won the race." What I discovered when I went to look that up was that the driver of that Delahaye was Rene Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I go, it was one of those, whoa. So what happened was the reason that Dreyfuss, who was a world famous driver, went to the U.S. was to avoid Hitler's wrath. So that's how I wound up in New York, and that's when my father went to the restaurant and convinced him to come out of retirement to be the team captain for the 1955 race.
So not to do story for story, but a quick postscript to that one is that Rene's autobiography, which is called My 2 Lives, written by Beverly Ray Kimes, is an absolutely wonderful book. And there's a whole chapter on driving the million-franc Delahaye. So, and Michael is absolutely right. Sam Mann and Peter Mullen each think that they have the car. There were 4 of these Delahayes, but only one was the million-franc car. And Rene was asked by, well, let me go back. I was writing, I had the car that purports to be the million-franc Delahaye in an exhibition in an art museum in Utah. And I was wondering, is this the real car? And I said to Beverly, "You and Rene ever look at this car?" And she said, "Oh, yes, we did." And I said, "Well, tell me about it. Does Rene think that this is the actual, authentic million-franc Delahaye?" She said, "It's an interesting story. We flew to California at the request of the owner, and Rene got in the car, closed his eyes, kind of caressed the steering wheel, and then he smiled, and he got out of the car, and I won't mention the owner's name, you can look it up, said, 'Well, what do you think?' And Rene said, I think this is the car." And afterward, I said to Beverly, "True, untrue, how did that go?" She said, "Rene, you know how polite Rene was. You know what a lovely man he was." I said, "Rene was Beverly saying, was this the car?" And he said, "I do not know, but Mr. Mullen is such a nice man, I can't disappoint him." So, did we do it?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Attention. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming out.
you.
And
Wasn't it
get on the internet and make sure you vote for us for the best automobile museum. Thanks.